He seems intent on sitting in front of you. Ooh, here we go.
Are we live?
We are.
Great. Hey, y'all. Welcome to What's Up, Docs. I am Dr. Liz. This is Willie, my assistant.
I'm Dr. Abby. My assistant is dead asleep on the floor. David Sherman doesn't want to participate today.
We'll see how long Willie lasts. He
That's
is a
right.
50-pound lap dog,
Too funny.
but he does love being, he is a lap dog, like straight up.
Yes.
And
Okay,
he's
sing.
taller than me this way. Anyway, Dr. Abby.
Yeah. So Liz had a very full week this week with the NATS conference, the National Association of Teachers of Singing. I tuned in for one of the pre-conference presentations called Voice and Hearing Health for Singers and Voice Teachers. Mind blowing all over the place. It was awesome.
It was a great session. It
Yeah,
was one of the
really
best
good.
sessions of its kind that I've seen, and I've seen a lot. At voice conferences, we see stuff like that all the time, but it was fabulous.
Very good. One of the first things they talked about was they broke down the different sections of the body that helps people sing. And I watched it going, oh gosh, I definitely should have maybe known that. But there were the power source, the vibrator, resonator, and articulator. And the reason that this stuck out to me as a PT, I just felt like, oh, I know my part on the team now, and it's to handle power source issues. So if things are going on that aren't letting you move air in your body, that's going to make it awfully hard to sing. So I think of the power source as anything that stabilizes you and moves your ribs. So you should be able to feel your heels and your feet flat on the floor. Your pelvic floor muscles should be versatile in how effective they are in different positions. Abdominals, intercostals, diaphragm, everything that makes your ribs go in or out, which of course will make air go out or in. So what I'm curious about is, Liz, when you see somebody who's having, or when you're hearing somebody or seeing somebody who's having power source issues, what does that look like in terms of their musicality, what their sound is, their effort level?
So good question, and I just want to clarify. I didn't mention this when we talked earlier. When we are okay, the baby is whining. Willie, come here. He's unhappy unless he's on a lap. Sorry, ooh, that's not a view everybody wants. Okay,
Oh my
so what I
goodness.
didn't clarify is that the parts you're talking about, the power source, the vibrator, and the resonator, these are the parts of all musical instruments, right? So the power source for a piano is us. And then the vibrators are the strings, right? As they get hammered. And then the resonator is the soundboard. So for the singers, the power source is the air, and which includes our whole body. The vibrators are, of course, the vocal folds, and the resonator is the vocal tract. And of course, we add articulators, right? So the tongue, the teeth, the lips, all that stuff. So when there's a problem with the power source, what we hear is some kind of tension in the sound. And so tension in the sound.
Willie.
Yes, he's being needy. Hang on one second.
Oh gosh. Now that we're all, working from home and working from new places, our dogs get to come with us or stay with us, and they're so happy until we ignore them for like
I know he's really gonna come here. So, oh, geez, Louise. This is our best episode yet.
I mean, if Willie's in it, it's the best one.
So, when we talk about issues with the power source, what we're talking about is having to compensate in some way from here up to create sound. And so, constriction in the neck and the throat, constriction in the tongue, or tension in the tongue, tension in the jaw, to make up for the fact that something's going wrong in our power source. What that sounds like, it sounds like a few things. So it can sound like stridency of tone. It
Ooh,
can
what does that mean?
sound like instability of tone, especially in aging singers. When we lose that connection, there tends to be a lot of compensatory constriction that happens, which creates an unstable tone. And I'm sure we're all familiar with the wobble that we hear sometimes with older singers. That's not a given that our voices are going to do that. It's when something goes wrong and we try to make up for it in another way. So we hear vocal instability and we hear stridency of tone. The other thing you can hear is just a tone that lacks energy, really, or lacks that resonance. What we see is a few things. Sometimes you see the tension, right? It's not always bad if these muscles are engaged, but if they're so engaged that the singer can't, I call it the Batman, right? So Batman has this suit on and he can't move, and so he has to do those things. So we see it that way, some kind of tension keeping people from moving. Another thing we see is I like to say sometimes singers look like they have extra gravity.
Oh no.
Extra gravity pressing on them. So sometimes I'll see this,
Oh yeah.
right? This pressure here, which of course leads to an even more collapsed chest, which is even more or less access to the power source. So those are the kinds of things that we look for and we listen for as voice teachers.
Interesting. What was the first thing you said? Stridency of tone? What does that mean?
Stridency of tone, right? So if you think about a tone, I use imagery a lot because I tend to hear sound in image, in like visually, right? So if you think about this, a perfect tone having this just kind of a round shape. Stridency of tone, oh, it's kind of a round, nice shape. Oh, right? So the tone tends to get skinnier, and it kind of has edges on it. Now, that's not always a bad quality of sound, right? So certain styles of music, you'll want that kind of sound. But if we're talking about, at this point, the classical voice, it's certainly not a desirable sound. And even if it's a desirable sound, you want to get to that sound in a free way, not because it's the only sound you can make.
Oh, I like that. Anytime you have
Right.
choice in the matter.
We never want to default. It should always be a choice. Whatever vocal sound we're using, right? A beautiful sound, an ugly sound, whatever sound we're using, it should be a choice and it should be done in a way that we can repeat, right? Consistency, and that doesn't cause pain, right?
Right.
Pain is not
Like
great.
you can maintain that and be okay with it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool. Okay. That's interesting. I love the imagery. I think that's really good. When I think about some of the compensatory things that I see in especially the anterior neck here, when singers and anybody comes in with basically power source issues, I tend to see people with, if these are your ribs, rib cages that are either held very elevated and don't know how to compress, which we talked about a little bit last time, I think, with this like, choral thing that we were taught at a time. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So really elevated, and that's not a bad place to be if you can't get to the opposite. That's the problem. So going back to this choice thing, we need to be able to put our ribs wherever we need them to make whatever sound or do whatever movement we want to do. The other thing that can happen is it can be one-sided. So it's usually the right side that's down and the left side that's elevated just because of where our organs are placed in our body. And so that asymmetry can add up where you end up working harder on one side up here than the other. And
singers often experience that, by the way. Singers will often experience discomfort on one side of their neck, right? Yeah. And so I always know it's from something compensatory, or not always, generally we know it's from something compensatory, but hearing this description, it makes sense why it's only on one side.
Right. Yeah. If you have one side where your diaphragm is, your ribs are down, your diaphragm is domed up more. We talked about this last week. If your ribs are out, the diaphragm is down. The image that I think of is, did you ever play the parachute game in gym class where all the kids are going wee with the parachute and it goes up and then they run away from each other and the parachute flattens out? If the ribs spread apart and go wider and elevated, parachute diaphragm flattens down. If they come together, it can dome up. There's nothing wrong. They can work differently in different positions. That's fine. It's just when you learn a pattern so well you can't get out of it, then you end up developing other strategies to get the oxygen you need, because oxygen beats all else, right? Who cares if you can squat? Who cares if you can sing? If you have oxygen, you're still alive. Yay. So if you're not moving air well from a rib cage, from a more effective rib cage movement, what will happen is you've got these scalenes and other muscles in the front of the neck that attach to your ribs, and we'll go, that's fine. We'll pick up your ribs from here. Now you have your oxygen. Now try to imagine this helping you breathe, staying on all the time, and then also having to try to sing or do anything. I can imagine this resulting in some of that, like, what did you call it? Batman posture that you're
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes this you just need to learn how to do it differently. Sure. Like you can just cue, hey, can you relax here? Right. But sometimes it's serving the person in a very, very important way. And so you have to then address the reason why they're doing it in the first place.
So how does this relate to the rest of the torso, right? The breathing system. So,
yes,
right, all the way down to the pelvic floor.
Absolutely. So diaphragms and pelvic floors are essentially twins in how they move. So when the diaphragm goes up, your parachute goes up. So do the muscles in the bottom of your pelvis. They come up with your diaphragm. That way the pressure in your abdomen stays the same. If this went up, all of a sudden you'd have a negative pressure in your abdomen. So they have to go together. More importantly, if this stayed up and this went down, you're going to have a lot of pressure going down through your pelvic floor. Doesn't result in great things. So
Yes.
We want those to move together. If there's an issue with, it could be like a traumatic injury to your pelvis, or even just postural patterns or pelvic floor patterns you've learned that, again, don't give you the choice to be domed up or down and fluid in those motions. Your diaphragm doesn't get to move either, and there goes your power source. So all of these things need to function together. The other sensory experience that you have to be able to have is having your heels down. And I know a lot of singers are also dancers, and a lot of dancers spend a lot of time on their toes, and so they don't necessarily have the mobility in their ankles to really flatten their feet down and have a solid feeling of their heel on the ground. The reason this matters is because if you have more of your body weight forward onto the balls of your feet, you're going to also be moving forward at your ribs, and then you've got that big elevation again. It's fine as long as you can get back on your heels and your ribs can come back down. Just that choice. You have to have the choice.
So, two questions. The first is talking about the scalenes and the sternocleidomastoid, making that adjustment to lift your ribs so that you can take in air. My first thought on that is that as a voice teacher, we see this, right? And we don't want this to be the only answer, but often the only answer is we need to free your neck. Well, again, that's a symptom and not the real problem. So strategies for this, do we focus on the rib cage? Do we focus on what should we think about in the voice studio to help singers with this? Because I know I'm guilty of it. Like, okay, we need to free your neck. We got to find, especially the Batman thing, finding the bobblehead, right? Letting your skull just move around on that.
I have to bobblehead all the time.
Yeah, because again, if we're not counting on that power source, something else has to be doing the work, and that we get that here. So that's the first question: what we do in lessons, or what can we do in lessons for that issue? And the second question is maybe more of a philosophical issue: is our skinny culture creating problems in the pelvic floor with the ability to release the pelvic floor?
Yes.
Right? I mean, most of my students do not know what it feels like to release the pelvic floor muscles. And it's something that is scary for them because it's not a feeling that they're used to, right? So,
yes.
What are your thoughts?
First question first. Okay. Not only because it was first, but because I think we could talk about the second one for a while. We might get a little ranty. So,
no.
I know, right? So the first question regarding other cues you can use aside from like, hey, can you just let go and do a bobblehead, right? Which can be very helpful. But if someone can't respond to that, what I tend to think is, okay, what's the other end of the muscles that are tense, right? They attach to your head, obviously, but they also attach down here. So if you can ask someone to get relaxed down here and move the front of your ribs away from your chin, that is also a letting go. You don't have to just let go. I consider a head an appendage, right? We've got 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head, 5 appendages. We don't have to just move the appendage. We can move the trunk. So sometimes I'll give patients exercise where they're rotating, like they're on their back and they're punching with weights, and they're trying to rotate without their neck going with. You have to leave your head behind and move your body in all the planes of motion.
So can we do that standing? Like get the twist going without?
Absolutely. Most of the time I have to start with people on their backs so that they can relax their trunk into the ground and then go. Because if you try to rotate from an extended position, there's not much to do, and your head, you can actually see me moving. My head is already like attached, right?
Batman.
So if you can achieve flexion first, and it's funny how often I have to talk to people about learning how to slump, right? But it's true.
Oh, me too. Are you kidding me? I have my all the time.
Yes.
They're working, and then this gets locked.
Right.
I'm like, just
like,
be
hey,
lazy.
singing's supposed to be fun, man. Relax. So letting your sternum and your rib cage actually like sigh away from your chin and away from the front of your neck is a good way to relax the muscles from the other end.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Good. Yeah, it's something I can try in the voice studio for sure. And it's something that I can try that I don't feel like I'm doing something dangerous, right? I mean, I always tell my students, like, if anything doesn't feel good, like, let me know. We can always find something else to do. But this feels like something that we can try. It might work and it might not, but I'm not going to cause any damage doing it. Right?
The other thing that I just thought of, I don't, not being a voice teacher, I don't know how this would go, but it could be a good idea to, like, do you have some kind of like intake form or like an email where you're like, hey, can you tell me about what your goals are, what you're looking to do when new students apply? To put on there, like, have you had a history of back pain, rib injury, pelvic floor dysfunction, any kind of like trauma? Because all of that will feed into this pattern, and that it's not that you have to necessarily like, oh, then I need to address these things, but it might make you say, we're having a hard time developing this pattern that I want you to have. Based on this history, this is a good person to send to a PT or somebody, a movement specialist of some kind.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
In terms of this skinny culture question, I love this question. Yeah, I see this a lot, and I'm also guilty of this. I am in my own course of PT because of a rib issue, and we're figuring out how much I'm holding on with my rectus abdominis, which is your 6-pack, and how much it's pulling on my sternum and where the ribs attach here. How much, especially women, but everyone, we're asking people culturally to be skinny, whether they are or aren't, or everything, right? So you're what that means is you're asking your abdominals to pull in and hold for as many hours as you are out in the wilderness of our society. That is a lot of endurance training. And then when you're trying to do something where you don't want this sense of tension, you want a sense of freedom, but culturally you're being asked to stay in a certain shape, it's just too much work, and it feeds into this issue of not having choice in terms of what your pelvis, your rib cage, and everything else is doing. We've taken away our choice. We have to hold, and we have to stay, and we just have to deal and like operate on top of that. And it's not fair.
So I know we're running really long here, so I'm just going to ask one more question. When we have that issue, that holding and the abs and the pelvic floor invariably gets included in that. I forgot what I was going to say.
Uh-oh.
I'm sure it was mind-blowing.
It was probably the best question of the whole series.
Probably.
Well, let me say something that you're...
Oh, no, I remember.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, so when we're holding so much in one way, it seems like something else is not doing what it needs to be doing at that same time. Is that correct? And it might not be correct. But like if we're holding so much there, where would there be a weakness because of that? Or where might there be?
Yeah. When we talk about kind of the cultural needs of holding, it doesn't necessarily mean we're holding because something else isn't.
Okay.
It means the world is asking us to do that. But When you see someone who holds kind of rigidly, you're usually trying to create stability where there isn't somewhere else. So this is really common in tongue and jaw tension.
Ooh, we'll talk about that next week.
Stay tuned, people.
If you
Go
made it this far.
you know, right? Stay tuned for next week. But yeah, typically we're trying to create stability so that we can still have air, we can still do what we need to do. We're kind of like muscling through our function despite not doing it very effectively. So if we're holding all the time at our pelvic floor and abs, what that means is things are being held in a short position. Muscles do their best work when they're in their mid-range. So they're not too long, not too short, somewhere in the middle. If they're held all the time, they're not going to be deemed effective anymore. And what will happen is somewhere else in the chain will go, that's fine, I'm going to help you. So you get tension here, you get tension in your tongue, your jaw, etc.
We are just talking about that tension in the pelvis and the hips creating or being connected with tension in the jaw and the tongue.
Yeah.
The body's a fascinating thing.
Super fascinating. And the fact that singing is, I mean, it's breathing, right? So
Yeah.
a lot that goes into it. And it's really important, you know, singing, the things that affect our singing also affect our survival.
No pressure.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Thank you, Dr. Abby. That was a lot of fun.
No problem.
We're hoping to talk next week about the, tongue and jaw tension issues, something that most singers, all singers struggle with. And we'll talk more about how that's related to the power source.
Yes. And we also talk about things to look at your tongue that let you know that you do have tongue tension.
Yeah, which is all of us in some way. I had one great pedagogy teacher that said, you'll never be perfect, but you could always be better.
Oh.
Right? So we'll always deal with these compensatory issues, and they may never be perfect, but we can always get better at it.
Love that.
So
let's leave it.
See y'all next week. I know, right? Again, if you made it this far.
Yes. Next week, 9:30. We'll talk about jaw, tongue tension, and whatever else you ask questions.
Yeah, questions. All right, y'all. Have a great week.